So drums.
Yes.
I know that you like drums. I like drums, and drums and bass obviously work together.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you talk to us about that? I know you're kind of the king of low end in these
Yes.
parts. So
Drums are. I made a comment earlier about sound guys making used to be musicians that couldn't quite make it or something like that. If I could be a musician, I'd be a drummer, and I just love drums. And I love at how they really can, when the drums are right, and can really affect the way your mix sounds. It gives it such dynamics, especially in a live PA. I mean, drums in a live PA. One of the first times I heard a kick drum, and that low end just moved my chest. It was just one of those things. I was like, oh, how do they do that? And the first time, way back when I was in high school, we rented some subs for the first time, and it was just like, oh man, I remember those moments where it was like, when the low end was right, it was a really cool thing. So kick drum is of course the first channel on almost everybody's desk, and a lot of guys get really hung up on the kick drum, but it's a driving part of a lot of the mix, especially in today's music that a lot of people mix in worship music and stuff like that. And it really is the feel behind a lot of the songs that can really drive things. So I spend a lot of time usually on the kick drum at my current campus. We have 3 microphones in the kick drum. We're kind of crazy. We use the Beta 91, the flat condenser microphone in the kick, and we also use the Sennheiser 902. We used to have the Beta 52 or the D112, and those are all great, large diaphragm mics. What we loved about the 902 is that it was fast and it was punchy. And when you get into large rooms with a lot of subs, that punch is tough to achieve sometimes. So being able to get that straight from the mic was one of those things that was really really desirable when we tested them. I think it might have been, you had been around when we had like 4 microphones in the kick drum one time at church, and we had this stand with these like 6 mics on the end of them. They're all in the same drum, and we tracked them all at the same time and listened to the Audix D6 and all these things. But all of these mics are good mics, and they're great, and playing around with them and understanding them and learning them is a key part of knowing what you're going for. And certain mics work in certain drums better than others, and you've got to find that. For some of us, this is the only kick drum mic we've got, and we've got to figure out what placement works best. Is it in the hole? Is it out the hole? Is there even a hole? I've had to make kick drums before where there's just a flat head on the front end, and never could get what I wanted out of it, so we had to do whatever we could to get what we needed. But placement of those mics and stuff like that are all critical. We also use the Yamaha Subkick. We rarely use it because it's more of what I try to describe to my volunteers. It's the pants moving low end. It's the kind of low end that's like 50 and below kind of low end that it gives to the kick drum. If that's what you're going for, you've got it. The 902 is our punchy side, and the 91 is what we use for our snap on the kick. I love using the 2 mic scenario on the kick drum because it allows you to kind of EQ on the fly. If you want a punchier sound, you can push up the 902 and pull back the 91. If you want a rock and roll sound where there's a lot of snap and a lot of attack on the kick with that punch, you push both of them up. If you want a jazzier sound that's not got near as much punch, you can push that 91 back up, and the more natural resonances of the drum are there. So, that it works great at monitors too, because if you've only got one kick drum mic and one guy goes, hey, I need more snap in the kick, I need more attack, well, you're going to give snap to everybody because you're going to reach up and turn up the 4K or 5K on that, and it's going to affect everybody, and then everybody's going to go, oh, it's too snappy. So having 2 kick drum mics really allows you to go, hey, give him more 91, and kind of EQ those on the fly. So it's really helpful in a lot of scenarios to have 2 kick drum mics. But I mixed a record recently and found myself only using 1 kick drum mic because I could get what I needed out of that one thing. And it's not all things are always the same in all times. So, but in a live scenario, like I said, you can always mute a mic. You can always turn one off. So it's kind of good to have an extra one there. Snare, for me, I'm always going for a snare that really snaps and that pops. Not a pop snare, but one that just has got a good attack and good crack. And we use compression and gating and EQ and all kinds of stuff on that to get those kind of sounds. For me, right now we're using a Beta 57 on the snare top. It's very, very similar to the regular 57, except for it's got a little bit tighter pattern, and that's what I like about it. It's a little bit tighter, and I don't get as much hi-hat in it, and that's kind of the main reason why I use the Beta 57, and it's got a little more top end on it than the regular 57. So, and I'm always find myself on the EQ on the snare, boosting a little 5K, 6K to kind of give it a little bit more snap. And so that mic did what I was always doing with the 57. So that's why we chose it. We put a condenser on the bottom. There's a lot of detail in the snares, especially when somebody's using brushes or whatever. So I enjoy putting a condenser on the bottom, and I high pass it pretty good. I don't need any of the body of that drum at that point. Usually the top snare is getting most of that, and it's an accent thing. And I find myself I compress really fast the bottom snare so that the snap is still coming from the top, but the ring and the body of that snare is coming from the bottom mic. And it's kind of been just one of those things when you play with and go, I really like that, to fast compress, fast attack, fast release that bottom snare, and when the drummer hits the snare, it cracks, and that top one. The bottom one is compressed so fast that it's not really part of the mix, and then you hear the detail and the ring of the drum that is desirable. Because to me, the ring on the bottom sounds better than the ring on the top. It's just, at least in the few snares that I've had recently. So, kind of a fun thing. You going on to hat? Hat is. I typically, when I mic my hat, I will only put what the snare's not getting. By the time I get the snare compressed and sounding the way I want, I'm going to have a lot of hi-hat in it. I mean, it's literally 7 inches away or so from that mic, and there's a lot of hat in there. So what I'll do is I'll just put the top end sizzle in that hi-hat mic and pan it hard, because the snare is usually pan centered, but I'll pan the hat hard to kind of pull the direction of the hat off of the center as much as possible. And that's another thing. It's like, a lot of times somebody goes, the hat's too loud, and you turn down the hat, and it's not the hat. It's the overheads that are too loud that the hat is picking up, or the snare is too loud. And that's mixing. That's going, hey, it's not just turn down the hat. It's not that easy sometimes. It's turn down the effect of the hat in the other microphones, or there are other mics that need to be gated, or the placement need to be different. And going on from the hat, we usually have our toms. One of the key things for toms to get the sound in the toms that we like is I boost the attack on them to get the snap. The proximity of the mic usually gets a lot of the low end. I'll sculpt the low end. I'll pull a lot of the low mids out of a tom mic just to keeps them from sounding boxy. But when we get the tom, again, sounding exactly the way I want, it's got cymbals in it for days. So gates are pretty important part of the tom sound that we want. Because by the time I boost the 4 or 5K to get the snap in the tom that I want, the cymbals are going to be going crazy in those mics. And with gating is one of those things that you can get wrong really easy, really fast. And it's one of those things that, especially on toms, because they're such a dynamic instrument with drums and stuff, frequency-sensitive gating is pretty important. I basically, only allow the gate to be sensitive to frequencies like 150 and below. And that way, the proximity of that tom mic is what's going to open that tom mic up. And another key part of gating, I think, to make it not feel so choked, is the range. Like, I only take the range down as far as I need it. I won't mute the microphone. I want it to only take out 6 or 7, maybe 10 dB out of those toms. That way, if he does something soft, you've only got it down 6 dB. It's not muted, and he's doing something that you can't hear. And but when he does hit it, the gate opens up and closes in appropriate times. And those are some pretty key elements that I've found to gating that have really helped make it sound more natural and not like, oh, I hear the gates opening and closing on that. Especially when somebody does get wailing on a snare or a tom or a snare or overheads, and the gate opens without them hitting that tom. It's not this, this really loud, all of a sudden something changed in the drum kit, like you unmuted something. And those are some important pieces to making sure that the drum kit sounds natural and you're getting the sounds and the tones that you want out of other things. Overhead is usually the next thing. I've recently started going to the single mic overhead, and mostly for time alignment issues. Because of digital consoles, you can delay channels and make it all align up. And it's been a very successful thing. I've had to learn some new things because I used to close mic my cymbals a lot, and it was great because I could go, oh, I need more left ride, or I need more right crash, and I could fix that in my mix really easily. And but now with this overhead, I've got a lot of kit sound, and I've had to EQ that overhead differently than I normally would, and compress it a little bit and get some different tones that I've been, to try to get, some other things. But the time alignment is what it's done is brought the whole kit as one piece instead of it sounding like 10 individual mic'd things. Is to make it all sound like one drum kit. Like if you didn't have any mics or any in-ears on or anything like that, and you just sat behind a drum kit and you started drumming, it wouldn't sound like 10 individual instruments. It sounds like one instrument. And that's what I try to pull out of the overhead, is like this is all one instrument, and this is the piece that's tying it all together. And so that's typically kind of what I do. I find myself, just some of the secrets that I've got, it's a very different drum kit when you got a drum shield, and you got to be aware of that. And that drum shield or fishbowl or whatever the guys like to call it can make a really big difference on that sound. And you've got to be aware of those things. I mean, ideally, I'd not have a drum shield, and I would just let it be wide open, and it'd be rock and roll. But the reality is that you got vocalists that are 10 or 15 feet away, and they want more in their in-ears, and all they're getting is more drums, and it's one of those battles you fight. So, I've had people say, on the front row something sounds weird, and it's just because the drums are so loud right there, and you've got a mix that's cruising about 96, 97 dB out front of house, and when you mute the front of house and you walk to the front row with the front meter, and they're 97 dB of drums just with the house muted, that's gonna affect the front half of the room of what the drums sound like, and those are all things that you got to think about. So that's why we've continued to go with the shield, even though it doesn't sound the best on the mics. The overall outcome of the shield has been definitely one of those things that's beneficial. So the drum kit is definitely a huge part of my mix, and it's a huge part. And my music director here at this campus is a drummer, and it's cool because we're in line with a lot of cool things, and he loves drums as well too. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy miking drums, and I enjoy hearing drums through a PA. It's one of those things that really inspires me, and some of the best concerts I've been to have been because that drum kit was right. I remember sitting in the audience and a guy doing a solo for about 5 minutes, and you're just sitting there, I could just listen to that for a long time. And that really influenced what I imagine when I sit behind a console and somebody's drumming. So those are definitely things that are a pretty key part to my mix.